study got to council, and this was the soonest that we're able to get Mr. Jackson back in front of council with timing and agendas and all of that. Council asked Mr. Jackson to perform work to evaluate our financial structure and evaluate our wastewater utility and create a rate table for the city. I specifically asked him to project it further than normal to a 10-year period and come back with some analysis in a report for council and a table for council's consideration. So with that, I wanted to introduce Mr. Jackson with Willdan. He has a report from you to that effect, and hopefully, if council likes what it sees, it can direct staff to develop a schedule and publish a notice of intent.
Thank you, sir, and Mr. William. Mr. Jackson, welcome, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Dan Jackson, Vice President of Willdan Financial Services. I'm a water and wastewater rate consultant with about 35 years experience doing water and wastewater rate design and long-term financial planning for utilities throughout Arizona, Texas, the United States, and the Pacific region. I'm actually based out of Plano, Texas, but I spend a lot of time here in Arizona. I've got about 30 or 35 clients here in the city. I've also had the privilege of being the City of Bisbee's rate consultant for about the last 20 years. I've been working for the City of Bisbee since 1998 on the famous wastewater project. I worked with NADBank and BEC and all those other agencies trying to help the city design a rate plan that would enable you to finance your portion of that wastewater project. It was a long project, but ultimately a very successful one, and I'm very pleased and grateful for the opportunity to come back here and talk with you all again. Rate making is always a very difficult topic to talk about. Nobody ever wants to talk about raising water and wastewater rates. Nobody ever wants to pay more for anything at any time for any reason. But there are some very important facts, I think, that the city needs to consider in designing an ultimate long-term rate plan for its benefit and for the ratepayers' benefit. In this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the industry itself, because I think it's very important for decision makers like yourselves to understand what's happening in the marketplace and what's happening with wastewater rates around the country. I'm then going to talk briefly about your customer base and your costs, and then I'll present to you the wastewater rate plan that we're going to recommend for the city to implement. But like I said, it's important to keep a couple of things in mind as we go through these numbers and as we go through this rate plan. The first thing is that water and wastewater rates are going up all over the United States. They're going up all over the world. As a matter of fact, the average utility has been increasing its rates 5 to 6% every year. Water is a precious and diminishing natural resource. Wastewater service is an increasingly expensive natural service that has to be provided. Many of the reasons why costs are going up are for reasons that are really beyond a city's control. You try to run your wastewater operation like a business. You want the revenues from your wastewater rates to cover all the costs of providing service. Well, guess what? Like any business, your costs go up. Heck, due to inflation, the cost of everything goes up by 3% a year. So it's reasonable to assume that wastewater rates would trend up over years. Secondly, wastewater utilities are required to meet certain state and federal guidelines. That was one of the primary motivators behind the famous wastewater project that the city undertook back in the 90s and the first decade of the 21st century. State, federal government comes in and tells you you have to do things. They tell you your effluent has to meet a certain standard, but they don't pay for it. They tell you you have to pay for it. And so when those regulations add cost to your system, you as a utility have to pay for that. Also, the costs of repairing and maintaining a system are going up. It costs a lot more money to lay a sewer line in the ground today than it did 20 years ago. And it's going to cost more in the future. And so a well-designed and well-managed wastewater utility has to take that into consideration. So there are reasons why costs are going up. And these costs are going to go up whether you adjust your rates or not. So it's important that we keep this in mind as we look at the long-term rate plan. So with that being said about the industry in general, let's talk about the city of Bisbee in particular. The last comprehensive wastewater rate study was performed by us. By the way, we were known as Economist.com during that time. In 2015, Willdan Financial Services bought out Economist.com, and so now I'm actually Willdan. But I'm still the same guy I always was, and I'm the guy who did your study back in 2009. Your last wastewater rate adjustment was actually in the year 2013 under this plan. This plan did something that is going to be very similar to what we suggest that you do tonight, and that is adopt a multi-year rate plan with annual adjustments each year. Under the last rate plan, the last adjustment was in 2013. Well, think about that. That's 5 years. Most of the state of Arizona and most of the nation has increased their rates by 25 to 30% in the last 5 years, while you all have the same rate that you had 5 years ago. So, what's the purpose of the study today? Well, one of the reasons is to look at where your costs are now and where they're going in the future. Another important thing is that the city is in the process right now of funding a $7.6 million refinancing bond. And that bond is going to have a very significant and, quite frankly, beneficial impact on the city's cost structure. But when you issue debt like that, you have to ensure that you have a rate plan in place that enables you to service the debt. Because if you don't have a rate plan that can pay your debt, you're not going to be able to borrow money. So, and then finally, we're going to help prepare a financial study and letter that will be included in the revenue bond issue. That's, these bond issues require a lot of paperwork and reports and stuff like that are just kind of part of the process. So, the fund right now as it stands is actually recovering less than what its costs are right now. That's one of the findings that we have. Over the last decade, the total has been about $5.5 million. Since 2013, the last rate adjustment, unfortunately, the city's costs have been exceeding its revenues. The reserve. So what you've been doing is you've been dipping a little bit into your reserve fund in order to fund these expenses. But the city's losing money on its wastewater service right now. And as a matter, but the new debt that you're issuing is going to significantly benefit this rate plan because it's going to reduce your costs very, very greatly. And by reducing your costs, that is going to lessen the impact of rate adjustments in the future. So let's talk about this debt restructuring, because that's really more than anything else is the reason why I'm standing before you, giving you this report tonight. The debt refinancing is going to reduce your annual cash requirements by $600,000.
And Dan, and Mayor, if I could, in between the time that you were supposed to be here and now, we concluded the restructuring. It has been done. So we're good to go on that, and these numbers are actually occurring right.
Yeah, it has been finalized, but it has reduced your cost by $600,000. So it's basically taking you out of the red right now. And what it's done is it's eliminated your net losses. So it also is going to provide you enough money to enable you to begin rebuilding your capital reserve. And most importantly, while we're recommending that you introduce a new long-term rate plan, the first rate adjustment is not going to be required for 3 more years as a result of that. So yes, we're asking you to adopt a long-term rate plan, but the first adjustment isn't going to be till 2021 under this plan. Now, without that, had you not done this, had you not reduced your annual cost through restructuring your debt, you would need an immediate 10% rate adjustment this year and next year. So basically your rates are going to be 20% lower because you did this debt refinancing. Look, I'm just a financial guy, I'm not an operations guy. All I can tell you is that from a financial standpoint and from a rate-making standpoint, it was a very, very good move for you to do this. I think it was a prudent financial move, and most importantly, it's going to open up the opportunity for the city to get renewed grant funding from NADBank and USDA. You see, these federal and state organizations will not give you grant money if they don't feel like you are in sound financial condition. They're not going to do it because they're going to feel like they're pouring good money after bad. Now you have restored a good financial position of the wastewater utility, thanks in large part to this debt restructuring. And as a result, I think you've opened up the opportunity to get new grant funding in the future. Okay, let's talk real briefly about your current rate structure. You charge your fees, you charge basically fixed fees for your wastewater service. You have to do that because you don't own or operate the water system. Many utilities around the United States charge a volume rate for wastewater service. $2 per 1,000 gallons, $3, $4, whatever. They do that because they control the water utility, so they know how much water is going into the house. Since you have a private water company that does that, you don't really have access to that information. So you've done the next best thing. You've established monthly fees for your service. That's what a utility in your position has to do. What is the monthly fee? For a standard residential home, it's $47.60 a month. However, you also have a rate for your low-income ratepayers, which is $28.57, and an even lower discounted low-income rate of $14.58. Once again, you're following basic rate-making ideology that says that you establish a residential rate, but like every community, your neediest ratepayers are getting a bit of a break. And you're allowing them to, you lessen the impact of monthly service on your neediest and lowest income people. On the commercial side, as you can see, your retail, restaurant, bars, they pay monthly fees that are a little bit higher. So, one question people ask is, how do our rates compare to the rest of the country, or I'm sorry, the rest of the state of Arizona? It's a common question that's asked. So I've got a couple of charts in here to kind of give you an understanding of what the burden that you're requesting of your ratepayers for the service that you provide them, how that compares to other existing communities. You are a little bit above the state average. The state average is about $36.18 for 5,000 gallons of wastewater service, which is a fairly standard amount of wastewater service for a residential family. You're at $47.60. Now keep a couple of things in mind. Arizona's a big state. There's over 100 incorporated cities and a couple of hundred water and wastewater utilities in the state. So there's going to be a wide variation of costs. But also keep a more important thing in mind. 30 to 40% of utilities in the United States and in the state of Arizona charge rates that do not cover their costs. So just because other utilities' rate is lower than yours, that doesn't necessarily mean their costs are lower. It might mean that they have made a managerial decision that they're going to subsidize their water and wastewater operation from their general fund. A lot of utilities do that. It's not uncommon. It's not the best financial policy in the world, but it's not uncommon. So keep that in mind when you take a look at this. Keep another important thing in mind. You're a smaller community with some very significant geographical challenges here. I live in a city called Frisco, Texas. Texas is flat as a pancake, mostly. And Frisco is as flat as the flattest pancake. And so it's very inexpensive to lay sewer lines in the city of Frisco. It's basically a prairie that is now home to the Dallas Cowboys, by the way. But it's very inexpensive to provide wastewater service there. You don't need lift stations. You don't need to pump sewage up or over mountains. You have to do that. So geography is going to add to your costs. Also, you're a smaller community. One of the key components of wastewater service is the concept of economies of scale. The larger your utility, generally the lower the rate. That's a general rule of thumb. Not always true, but it's a general rule of thumb. If you're a city like Phoenix or Tucson and you have several 100,000 customers crammed into a pretty compacted area, it's relatively inexpensive to provide service to all of them. In a spread out community like Bisbee that has many hilly areas, it's just simply a fact of life that it's going to be a little bit more expensive to provide that service. But that being said, when you compare yourselves to several other comparable communities, you actually compare fairly favorably. If you look at cities look at Jerome, Clarkdale, Prescott, Sedona, those are cities that have geographies that are fairly similar to yours and sizes that are fairly similar to yours. They're at or above your rate. Yeah, you are higher than some. You're higher than Douglas, and you're higher than Nogales and Wilcox and some of these other utilities. But what this is telling us is that your rates are kind of where you'd expect them to be. They're higher than some, they're lower than others, even taking into consideration the very significant financial and cost challenges that you're facing right now. Okay, a little bit of real brief background information. You have about 3,577 customers right now. To no great surprise, the vast majority of them are residential. 2,700 residential, and a smattering of retail and other customers as well. When you do a long-term financial plan, one of the key components of doing this plan is to look at where your utility is going to go in the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, obviously costs are going to increase, but there are some communities that, particularly here in Arizona, that are facing very, very rapid growth rates. They can have vastly different customer bases in 10 years than they have right now. Well, a prudently designed financial plan has to take into consideration what growth factors are going to be. Now, also keep this in mind. A financial plan is not a guarantee. It's a prediction based on a series of reasonable assumptions. And one of the assumptions we're making is that the city's customer base is going to stay fairly static over the next 10 years. You're not really looking at a whole lot of growth. Maybe add 10 to 20 accounts per year, but you're going to be basically the same system 10 years from now than you are today. And that is built into our long-term rate plan. Okay, let's talk about your costs a little bit. Once again, we have to forecast not only, we take what your costs are in the current year, and we forecast them in the future based on a couple of general assumptions, almost all of which we went over fairly extensively with city staff. One of the things is that most of your expenses are going to increase about 3% a year. Cost of everything goes up by 3% a year, so I think it's prudent to build that into a rate plan. You do have a bit of an issue with your bad debt expense. It's about $160,000. That's a little higher than what you see a lot of utilities have. And the thing to keep in mind about bad debts is, well, it's understandable that some families are struggling and some families are having difficulty making their payments. But when a utility that has a lot of bad debt expense, that adds the burden to the customers who are already paying their bills. Because if one customer doesn't pay his bill, that other customer has to cover the cost of servicing that customer. We did just a real brief back-of-the-envelope calculation. That $160,000 of bad debts really amounts to about $3.65 a month per customer. So each customer's bill is a little higher than it otherwise would be just due to your bad debt issue. Another important thing is that you're going to be setting aside a capital reserve of between $600,000 and $650,000 a year. That's very important because your utility is going to require capital expenditures in the next 5 to 10 years. A well-managed utility, look, wastewater systems are like any other assets. They wear out over time. You've got to put money into them to keep them operating and maintaining properly. And this plan is going to allow you to do that. You've got general fund transfers. That's very good. A utility should have general fund transfers because the general fund and other city departments provide assistance to the wastewater system, so the wastewater system should reimburse those other city departments, and yours does that. And finally, we're not really anticipating that you're going to issue any more long-term debt anytime in the near future. So, what does that mean in terms of your total cost of service? Well, this very colorful chart here shows you that your costs are generally expected to creep upward in the next 10 years. The cost of maintaining your wastewater operation is about $2.7 million today, and it's going to creep up a little north of $3 million in the year 2028. For those of you who love numbers as much as I do, this chart right here is that very previous chart in numerical. I know that there's a lot of numbers here, but what it shows is your personnel costs are going to creep up a little bit. Cost of everything goes up. Operations costs, they're also going to creep up a little bit as time passes by. Your capital reserve is going to stay the same. Your debt service is going to stay pretty steady. And your transfers are going to stay pretty steady. So your total cost of service of about $2.7 million is expected to hit about $3 million by the year 2028. Okay, let's get to the important charts. And that is the rate plan. Once again, I cannot emphasize this enough. I think it was a very prudent financial move for the city to enter into this debt restructuring. Without this debt restructuring, you would need immediate rate adjustments. Because you did this, you have created some cushion for yourself so that while you are going to need rate adjustments, it's only a matter of time. Our recommendation is that you defer any rate adjustment until July of 2021. That's 3 years. So as you can see, no rate adjustment this year, no rate adjustment next year or the year after that. But the first adjustment, which is about 3%, goes into effect in July of 2021. It would take you an average residential monthly charge from $47.60 to $49.03. That's about $1.50. And then as you can see, you would need 2 to 3% adjustments in each of the next 5 years after that. So eventually your bill will hit about $55, but once again, that's 10 years from now. Keep in mind, the average utility is raising its rates 5 to 6% every year. So while your rates are projected to increase about 20% over the next 10 years, the average utility in Arizona is going to increase their rates about 50% over that same period of time. This is the commercial monthly charges. As you can see, it's the same percentage increase. So everybody's monthly bill would go up by the same percent. 3% in most years, 2% other years. This is one of these wonky charts that financial guys like I love. But one of the key components of any long-term debt plan is that you have to meet something known as coverage. You have to, see, it's great being a bond advisor. You get to sit there and tell people what you have to do in order to be allowed to borrow money. And one of the things they tell you is that your rates have to not only cover all your costs, but they have to cover a little bit more than your costs. Because that way, if there's any unexpected expenses, you'll still be able to pay their precious debt service. And so, most utilities have a 1.2 to 1.5 debt coverage requirement. This shows that you're going to meet that in spades. I mean, you're going to do great in your debt coverage over the next several years. Okay, on to my last chart. I do want to once again tell you that I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and provide this service to you again. It's always great to visit Bisbee. Been coming here for almost 20 years now. It's never easy to ask customers to pay more, even if that first adjustment isn't going to be for a couple of years. It is going to come eventually. And nobody wants to pay more for anything at any time for any reason. But if you do adopt this long-term rate plan, there are going to be benefits to it. You might think to yourself, what possible benefit could there be from raising people's sewer charges? Well, one benefit is that it will enable the city to continually cover all of its costs of providing wastewater service. In other words, all you're asking your ratepayers to do is pay what it is costing you to provide that service. It will also ensure that you maintain financial health. You have an obligation as overseers of the city to ensure that the utility that you pass down to future generations is as good a utility as the one you inherited. This rate plan will enable you to do that. It will enable you to set aside as much as $650,000 a year for capital improvements, which I guarantee you are coming. It's just a matter of time. We don't know where they are, we don't know when they are, but we do know it's going to happen. And finally, it will enable you to fund the debt service on your refinancing. I think that it is a difficult thing to ask ratepayers to do, but I think there are a lot of long-term benefits to the city. Now, I want to conclude this presentation just by talking a little bit about the next steps. If you decide that this is the plan that you would like to go with, there is a state law that you have to follow in order to implement a long-term rate plan. You can adopt a multi-year rate plan. One ordinance, one set of rates that could literally take you for the next 10 years. But in order to do that, you have to follow Arizona Revised Statute 9-511. What it means you have to do is the first thing you have to do is you have to pass, by council measure, something called a notice of intent. What it means is, it says, we're going to think about adjusting our rates. That starts a statutory clock. 60 days after you pass the notice of intent, you have to have a public hearing where you get to have me go through all this again. I know you can't wait. But you have a public hearing where you talk about the proposed rate plan and solicit input from the ratepayers. After that public hearing, you then have the ability to pass the rate adjustment if you so choose. And if you do choose to pass it, it would go into effect 30 days after the time you pass it. So from a clock standpoint, it doesn't matter that much right now because your first adjustment is until 2021. But the sooner you pass it and the sooner you adopt it, the sooner it is set in stone and it ensures that you will continue to meet your coverage requirements. So sometimes cities get confused over what the meaning of a notice of intent is. Notice of intent does not obligate you to vote for a rate adjustment. It just says, we're going to think about it and we're going to start this statutory clock. So a vote for that does not necessarily, it still gives you the opportunity to reassess the rate plan at a later time. So with that, I know I've been rambling on for a while, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
First question is, when you pass this rate plan, then are you locked into that? This multi-year, this 10-year rate plan?
It becomes the default option.
Right.
You as a council always have the opportunity to go back and revise it at any time you want. But the default option is that the adjustments go into effect at every time. If you do nothing, the adjustments go into effect. But if, say, for example, you get a big new development, or costs don't go up as much as you thought, or something else happens, or somebody gives you a gift of a few $1 million or whatever, and you have the ability of scaling back future rate adjustments, you have the ability to do that.
Questions, Council? Chair discussion.
This question may be for you or maybe for the city manager. It says here that there will be no increase in general fund transfers.
Correct.
And maybe you don't know the history, but maybe the city manager could address what general fund transfers have we been doing and where we're at on that. Because I think there's been some confusion about that, different readings of the budget.
Yeah. Yes, sir. The wastewater enterprise operated at a deficit for many years. And over that time, funds had to come from somewhere to offset those costs. For an 11-year period, it amounted to $5.45 million. Those monies need to be returned to those funds that they were borrowed from. At this point in time, while the utility is getting its legs underneath it, we don't anticipate increases in transfers to occur. But given the fact that we are investing $640,000 a year back into the enterprise, we do anticipate a day where we want to come to you and say, there needs to be a cash flow redirect back to the general fund and the sources where these monies came from to make them whole. We haven't gotten to the bottom of the financial policy and the mechanisms for doing that yet. We want to wait until the money's there before we entertain that.
Thank you.
I have a question, piggyback question on Councilmember Higgins' question. The $462,000 right now, I mean, because we have a transfer to the general fund for each one of the funds to pay for, just the services that are being provided. Is that the 462?
Yes, ma'am. That's the amount that the general fund charges the wastewater utility to support it and operate it.
And that's based on a percentage?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
So if we're making more money in the wastewater, or if their operating expenses are higher, isn't that also going to go up?
I would expect it to go up. I would expect the evaluation for that to be part of the budgetary process and setting the budget. This year, we did anticipate the restructuring of debt as we were going through the budget, and so the numbers we have are suitable for the year that we are in. But I would suggest that we would evaluate that every year to make sure it's true.
Because I know we did that in order to make everything equitable.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just wondering if that is going to actually go up more than the 462. Not that it makes that much of a difference, because I think everyone has to pay their fair share.
Well, every year will be a little bit different based on the department and what it's doing and based on what costs are for the general fund to provide services. But I don't expect the amounts to be markedly different because the same perspective on policy on how we create those numbers will be the same year over year. And, in partial answer to the structure of the rate plan being a 10-year plan, at some point it's prudent for council to come back and reevaluate the rate plan. And about every 5 years you should be looking at that. So when you get in the middle of this schedule, it's time to look at it again and see if it's true to what your desires are in terms of funding for the enterprise.
And I have two more questions just based on the reserves and the capital reserves. I can't remember, and I didn't go back and look at the budget, but what do we have anything in capital reserves for wastewater at all?
I would have to go back and look. Carrie, do you? Don't know. Our recollection is it's zero, but we would want to confirm that.
Okay. And and I know we took a lot out of the reserves in order to put it in the budget, so I'm assuming that we don't have anything left in reserves.
I do believe that there are some positive. There's a positive cash balance in reserves. I don't know off the top of my head what that number is. I will say that by restructuring the debt and not having to make such a huge payment on that loan, we now have way more cash in that enterprise. And as Dan was talking about coverage, if you think about it, when you're taking a loan out and somebody looks at your finances and they see that you have the ability to repay that loan 2.5 times over, that helps a lot when it comes to applying for grants and assisted funding.
I just wanted to know where we were right now and then what kind of a difference that this would make. Thank you.
So we paid, for this study, we paid 19,000? Is that what we paid?
I believe that's the price for the contractual services.
So that's, if we accept it, that's what we paid?
The work has been done,
Okay.
the service has been rendered, and so we do owe Mr. Jackson the fee for doing the work.
But then if it was to be accepted, that's it? There's no more payment after that?
No, once he's done the analysis, his work is done, and
And that's the 19,000, that's the cost?
yes, sir.
And that's already been paid, correct?
I'm not sure if it's been remitted yet.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be.
But that's, before this study, that's what we paid.
That's correct.
But it has to be accepted to be paid, or no?
No, sir, he's done the work, he's delivered the work to council. Our agreement with him was that once he did the work, we would pay him for it. It's not contingent on whether or not council accepts the analysis.
So, I mean, what is Plan B? This doesn't go through, what is Plan B?
Well, if council decides not to amend the rate table, the existing rates will be imposed. And we will stay where we are with no plan for the future.
So there's nobody else that can adjust the rates? Because they're saying there doesn't get immediate race adjustment, right?
No, rates wouldn't adjust for 3 years.
If this wasn't accepted, is what I'm saying.
If you don't accept the rate plan, your current rate table will remain in force as long as you, the council, want it to remain in force. If you adopt this rate table, you're telling the community that 3 years from now, you anticipate a rate increase.
Anything else, Mr. Weston? Sir?
Mayor, what's the logic of going 3 years with no increase and then pumping it up to 3% for 3 years, then back to 2%? Seems like we could do more gradual.
Well, I've often said rate making is an art, not a science. There's a lot of different rate plans you can put into place that'll get you the revenue you need. What we're telling you is that you do not need to adjust your rates right now. However, what some cities do is they implement a nominal increase every year, whether they need it or not, because if they don't need it this year, they're going to need it next year. One of the other advantages you have is you're a nonprofit organization. So to the extent your revenues exceed your costs, all that means is that's additional money that you set aside for future capital improvements. So instead of waiting 3 years and doing 3%, 3%, 3%, you could theoretically do this year 1%, next year 1%, next year 1%, next year 1 or 2%, 1 or 2%. You could do that. It will mean that you will likely over-recover a little bit in the early years, recover more revenues than you theoretically need. But once again, that's not money you're burying in your backyard. It's not money you're using to pay dividends. It's money that you're setting aside for capital projects. So now the question just becomes, what do you think is more amenable to the ratepayers? Would the ratepayers rather see just a 1% or maybe 50 cent a month increase in their bill each year, or wait 3 years and see $1.50? It's really, it now becomes sort of a policy decision, and then it becomes more, since you're the policymakers of the city, that's basically your choice.
So your analysis indicates that we will need to bump it up to 3% increase in 21, 22, and 23.
That's correct.
So you do have an analogy. You'd say if we went for a higher increase in those first 3 years, you'd say that might exceed what our expenses actually are. You're also indicating to us, you're projecting that we are going to have increased expenses in those middle years.
Correct. See, what's happening is that, because of your refinancing, you have less cash obligations now than you have. So that can carry you for a couple of years. But as your expenses gradually increase, that's going to run out in 3 years. And so you're going to have to start doing rate adjustments. And so you could, like I said, you could do 1% this year, 1% next year, 1% next year, and then something less than 3% in the years after that. I'd have to recalculate the numbers. But you could certainly do that. Many cities do it. Many cities have passed an ordinance that says, we will increase rates 3% a year unless the council tells us otherwise. And they do that in perpetuity, because they know costs are going up, and they know they're going to need more revenue. It's just a matter of how much revenue they need. So you have some discretion over what ultimate rate plan you set.
Anything else, Mr. Tillman?
No, I think that's my only thing, that we have, my consideration anyway, is why not go with the 1%, and then reduce that bubble in the middle there, 3 to 2%, or something like that, so it's more predictable over a period of time.
Right, excuse me. I was going to say, yeah, and the good thing is that if we vote for intent to do this, and we'll have a hearing, we can discuss those options with the public at that time. I think that's a good feature of this.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. Is that the study has told us where it needs to be in 3 years, but not necessarily how we have to get there.
And council, if I may, Mayor, sorry to interrupt, if council does determine that it wants a different schedule for rates, Mr. Jackson's happy to run those numbers and produce those reports and exhibits for you to consider.
Any other questions, councilors? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is ASU here? Yep. You've got somebody check. Thank you. Welcome, gentlemen. Oh.
We apologize for keeping you waiting.
You
Parked at the wrong spot.
everything's fine, sir. Do you have a PowerPoint?
Yeah, we do.
Is it on a,
It's on a phone drive.
yes, sir. Would you mind providing it to the clerk, and she'll fire it up for you?
Absolutely.
And who will be presenting?
Well, I'm going to say a few words first
All right, sir.
as an introduction, and then the young man in the coat and tie is going to make the main presentation. I've got some wrap-up speakers.
Excellent. Excellent.
How much time do we have for the presentation?
How much time do you need?
Oh, well, we're aghast. We can expand or fill any volume.
Yeah, so are we.
Well, we're thinking half hour, 45 minutes.
That's great. You have over a half hour.
Oh, excellent.
I know. I've been thinking. I thought we were going to release that. So we would be able to control it. Right, the second order of business tonight is the solar presentation by Arizona State University. And with that, sir,
Okay,
would you please come up and let everybody know who you are?
please put in here.
Please, sir. And welcome all of you. Thank you so much. And in advance, thank you for allowing the hard work you've done on this. It's been fun talking to you.
Chair Smith, committee member, council members, good evening. My name is Ron Rodell. I'm an emeritus professor at Arizona State University, but also director of a special master's program in solar engineering and solar energy engineering and commercialization. And I'd like to identify my colleagues. The man with the tie is Dixit Chatbar. He's a graduate student at ASU. And this presentation also constitutes his defense of the applied project required for him to complete this master's. Normally, we give these applied project defense talks in less grandiose circumstances. It's usually a little empty room at ASU with me and an advisor. And the other two gentlemen here are the industrial advisors to this project, Roger Moore and Keith Rowley. And they work with a company called Solar NRG, and it's spelled out on the front page there. So, to advance, I'm going to say a few words of introduction about this, then I'm going to hand the clicker over to Dixit. Do I point at the screen? Or
it should advance.
depends on which button.
That was the laser.
That was the laser. Got it.
There you go.
Okay. So, the Professional Science Master's Program at ASU is a rather unique structure for a graduate program. It's a one-year master's program. It's equal parts, well, maybe not quite equal, but they're 50% engineering, maybe 25% on solar business, and 25% on solar policy, so that the entire enterprise is the theme of the project, of the program. This master's program was started with a grant from National Science Foundation. The Professional Science Master's is the title of the degree the student gets. Not a Master of Science, not a Master of Science and Engineering, a Professional Science Master's. I always have to explain that because it is a little bit unique. The students, in place of carrying out a master's thesis, carry out an applied project. An applied project has the same credit hours as a thesis, but it has a focus on that's quite applied and current in the solar business. The committee that reviews, helps define the project and then mentors the student through it has at least one industrial advisor and at least one faculty advisor or academic advisor. And that's what makes it a little bit unique. And the industrial advisor is often the person who helps to define the nature of the project that might be beneficial to his or her own company. But that's not necessarily the case, and that's not the case for this particular project. Instead, we can often arrange this so that we have a client that is not the industrial advisor. And the client could be the Arizona Corporation Commission, or it could be a large construction firm, but it could also be a municipality. And we have served as sort of informal advisors or counselors to the city of Tempe. And I think Donna Pulling got wind of this and called us up and said, do you think you could help out the good folks in Bisbee? And we said, absolutely, what have you got in mind? And I'm going to let Dixie take over after this. Just a quick moment on the timeline. We came, after a few conversations, we came to Bisbee and quite a few months ago. It was end of February of this year. And we thought about, before coming down, what kind of projects could we work on? Rooftop solar for Bisbee, parking structures that are covered with raised platform solar energy structures, rooftops for larger buildings, like the library, what have you. Well, when we got here, we learned about the 80-acre parcel of land that the city owns adjacent to the airport. And we were told, this is where we think we'd like to carry out some sort of solar project construction, some sort of solar farm. And maybe that 80-acre parcel could be eventually a business park of some sort, and the features or advantages of putting a business here would be that it has solar power to operate or reduce the electric bills of the businesses there. So we settled on, let's see what we can do with the 80-acre parcel. And what we finally hit on is, after doing some investigation, is that, well, you could use 10 acres or 20 acres or 60 acres of the parcel and keep the remainder for the business park, perhaps. And it scales linearly, so we said, let's pick 40 acres out of the 80, fill it with solar, see how much that can produce and what it would cost and so on. And if it's too large, you can scale it back to 20 acres, or if it's not enough, you can add a few more. All you have to do is just advance or diminish it in a linear way. So what we also did is think of ourselves as maybe people sitting in your seats and wondering, if we were to build a business park here, what kind of business could fill this park? And we were thinking of a number of things, and we're going to present those to you, and you might find these ideas amusing or farcical, but we'll see you. We're at universities, so we try to be expansive in our thinking. But we think we have a couple that might be potentially winners. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dixit, who will go over the analysis he carried out, the modeling, and some of the results concerning size, performance, power, energy, the whole solar business.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Dixit.
Thank you to the people sitting on my left. It's an honor and privilege for me to show this presentation in front of you all. I would like to say that the project is for the Bisbee and to the Bisbee of people. I would like to dedicate this project to the Bisbee people. And this is for you, because at the end of the project, we have an amazing idea for you, which what we think could be done into a potential business idea, and that could be a new source of income. Although my mind is really small to comment on that, because I have my project financiers and developers and my industry advisors and my director with me. So it's there and your choice to go on. At some point I do have an Indian accent. I'm not habituated with the American accent right now. So if you guys don't get something, just stop me and I'll just repeat myself again.
Or I'll translate.
So the main statement, climate change. Where the summers every year, it's going, more and more, the temperature is going more and more up. So what we decided is, let's, deal this with incorporating more and more renewable energy resources. The kind of the land we are in right now in the southern part of the United States, the most feasible thing which we can have is either a solar installation or a wind farm. And since I don't study wind farm, I didn't do wind farm. So moving further, the per watt capacity, the cost of all those energy that's being produced from the renewable energy resources going down and down. And it's like, I don't see like in the upcoming next 50 years that, a new millionaire or billionaire coming from the renewable energy going. There have been few cities who have already done that. The city of Aspen in Colorado, the climatic conditions is not same as the city of Bisbee, but the population is almost same. 6,000 people, and they achieved this landmark of going on 100% renewable energy resources in 2015 itself. There's a city in Burlington, Aspen, Colorado, where I said there's one more city in India in the western part, they've already done that. So we thought, why can the city of Bisbee be the first in Arizona to go and to be powered by 100% renewable energy resources? So as my director said that we are supposed to model for the 80-acre land, but we are not going to use the complete 80-acre land. So we decided to go with the 40-acre land, and when we mapped the project, it was 1:2 ratio for the capacity by the land. So if it is like 80 acres, the land produced 40 megawatts of plant. If it was 40 acres, which we are going to do for this project, it produced 20 megawatts of energy. Yeah. So what goes into a utility scale planning? Because since it's a 20 megawatt of plant, we determined the purpose of the project, which we already did when we came here in February this year. Site evaluation and site assessment was done by the new permission of the city mayor. Initial economic calculations, which we're going to present to you in this presentation. I'll mention this right now if I forgot to mention later. We are also going to submit a report which has in detail explanation of what goes where, what it's going to do, and how it can be achieved. It has got some numbers, some calculations, and some technical aspects which we haven't yet mentioned in this presentation because we wanted to keep this plain and simple. Possible project risk, what could be the risk of the project, everything is again mentioned in the report. Community engagement, how the city of Bisbee can come together to make this project reality. The approach, the solar farm was viewed as a possible solar powered industrial park. The design had to consider 2 embodiments with and without battery storage. The modeling was done on a software which is known as System Advisory Model, which is developed by our own NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So we designed this. Again, we also used this another software called Helioscope, which gave us in detail output of technical aspects. Since the site is an airport site and it comes under FAA regulations, we also had to run the glare analysis. Regarding the glare analysis, we have a detailed explanation again in this presentation. And off-takers. It's a 20 megawatt plant. There got to be some off-takers which are interested, really interested into this project, making a win-win situation for everybody. Design steps for utility scale construction. We selected the appropriate site, carrying out the permitting process for construction. Some of the steps might be like if the city is interested in going forward with this project, it's always like a business deal. We can sit and discuss what's going to happen next if the people of Bisbee find potential in this project. Carrying out the PV system and solar field engineering and design, interconnection to the grid, everything. So this is kind of an animation of where the project site lies. We can see the one with the tracks over somewhere up on the northern part is the potential site of the installation, and then the one which is at the bottom is the airport runway strip, which ends over there, and above that is our installation. This is the solar resource. Let me tell you what is the significance of this map. I would like to thank first of all Professor Mark Pell from University of Arizona, because the University of Arizona designed a tool which is called REOA, Renewable Energy Opportunity Analysis, which mapped the potential of establishing a solar farm which is more than 5 megawatts in the whole Arizona, and the one which and designated the most yellow area, which is most favorable, decreasing in the greenish area and the bluish area. So our airport site, which you can see as a blue dot, falls under the most yellowish area. This is the glare analysis. Let's not go into detail of the technical aspects, but the thing is, all the modules nowadays comes with an anti-glare coating, which covers 95% of the glare. When we mapped the project, it was only like for 10 minutes that the glare could come into the pilot's eye, whether it's going to be a landing or a takeoff. So at that point, either we can stop the landing or we can, change the timing of the landing and the takeoff, because it's just going to happen for 10 minutes. Another thing is any independent engineer or a professional certified engineer can give in writing that this module has got anti-glare analysis and anti-glare coating over the modules, and it does not come to the eyes of the pilot, something more in technical, and the project can pass through the FAA regulations. Also, you need to fill the form FAA 7460 that goes into this deal. The PV system, if you might not know how a PV system works, it's a simplified version of grid-tied system that changes the DC electrical energy to AC electrical energy, which we use in our place because we can use only AC energy and not DC electricity supply, and transmit that energy to the grid. This is a typical block diagram of a solar farm, how it works. You can see on the top left, on the top left, there's the solar panels. The sun shines on the panels, which produces the power. When that goes into the inverter, there are 2 or 3 more different kinds of technical things. That again goes to the inverter. Inverter is needed because the modules will produce a DC supply, direct current, which you cannot use. So the inverter will invert the current, it will convert into an AC supply, and then AC supply you can use, and you give it back to the grid or to the utility or to the, whatever the purpose of at the end of the purpose is. And there is a monitoring system called SCADA monitoring system, which gathers the data of how much amount of electricity the DC modules are gathering and how much amount of output is there, so that you can monitor the system and nothing goes waste. These are the orientation of the panel. We have developed the tilt angle of what would be the the installation, because it's not going to be a flat installation. There are going to be some degree of tilt which related to the ground land, which the panels produce the maximum power from the sun, and we can get the maximum output, because it also depends on the way you have angled your solar panels in the installation. So as we said, the modules and the inverter. For this project, we're going to use an ABB PV980 inverter, which ABB is the well-known name in the industry. And Astra Energy, we have pulled out this deal related to the cost analysis we're going to do later in the presentation, but we have pulled out the good deal for the project, and we're going to show you what cost, how much the modules and the inverter cost. The setup. When we model the setup for 40 acres of land that produce 20 megawatts of solar energy, we got to know that this project would need 45,000 modules with 10 inverters. 8 modules per string. If you can see at the lower right, bottom right diagram, the installation which you see, it's in the portrait mode, and 2 panels are one above each other. So that one line which you are seeing, that's called string. So we need 8 modules per string and close to 5,500 of strings that are in parallel, one over the other, or the third, fourth. That's in a way close to 5,500. So since you can see the modules are mounted one over the other, in the same way for our project we need 2 by 12 modules per row, which we get that we need 1873 rows in total. The DC to AC ratio is 1.20. Now what's this ratio is, as I said, when the sun rays falls on the modules, it produces DC energy. But again, to use that electricity, we need to use an AC electric current. The ratio, which is generally kept in the industry, because I also interned with a good construction company who are also solar contractors in Phoenix, we generally keep the ratio which is between 1.1 to 1.3, because the inverter, the energy which the module supply to the inverter and the inverter supply back to the grid, they're going to be a clipping if the ratio is not good enough. So we want to use the energy which is modeled from the modules as much as we can, reducing the losses as much as we can go with this. Fixed tilt and directed due south, the orientation will be in the southern direction, which is 180 degrees. This could be different layouts, how the installation could look. This can always change once the project goes ahead. Optimal tilt. We monitored for all the tilt angle and got to know how much amount of output is coming from the modules, and from our observation we got to know that, as you can see the arrow, the 23 degrees from the ground level, the tilt angle was the most efficient enough to get the most amount of energy from the installation. The results from the design. Using 40 of the available 80 acres for the solar farm, the farm could produce peak power production of 20 megawatts, as I said. The annual energy would be 37 gigawatts hour, that's 37 million kilowatt hours. Annual revenue that could generate is $4.8 million, that's 13 cents per kilowatt hours. On the left, the diagram you see is for the energy which is produced per year. And on the right, you can see the diagram which shows the solar energy which is produced in the months of all the years. On the left, the diagram shows for all the 25 years, because we modeled the plant for how it's going to, what amount of energy it's going to produce for the upcoming 25 years. Cost metrics. I would say the levelized cost of energy, which was 5.63 cents per kilowatt hour, it's nothing but just the total cost divided by the total electricity over the life the plant is producing. The net present value would be $3.5 million. That means that whatever the amount, the money the city is investing right now, and once they retrieve all those investment, what would be the price of the plant, or what would be the price at that moment of the plant? It shows that's called net present value. The cost. Now, when we got into the industry back in July, the cost of the steam modules were 64 cents per watt, but last month there was SPI, Solar Power International Conference in Anaheim. We got to meet a lot of vendors and suppliers from all across the globe. We sat with them at the table. This could be a potential project for them. We dropped down the price of the modules to 36 cents per watt, from 64 cents per watt to 36 cents per watt. 45,000 of modules, the on-ground cost to the point where the company exports the module to the point where the modules would be delivered on the site, $5.5 million. The inverter cost. We needed somewhere close to 11 inverters, but there was a point where we can reduce the one inverter, so we saved the cost for one inverter. So for this project, we need 10 inverters for 20 megawatt plants. The on-ground cost would be $1.5 million, that's $150,000 per inverter. The total cost including all the balance of system, because once you get the solar panels, you cannot just you cannot have 45,000 people keeping the solar panels on their hand and producing the power. So you need a mounting system for that, with the piles, the racking system and everything, the labor cost, the engineering, the design. And that's the beauty of this project is the city could save money in giving to the contractors, where the place where I work, we hire subcontractors and everyone just to design the project, and we pay them thousands of dollars. But for this project, since it's a student-based project and a university and applied project, the design has already been done. The total cost that came out to be was $21 million. If we divide by the 20 megawatt of capacity which is generating, the cost could be almost $1 per watt. This is the potential site. Since once you produce the power from this plant, where this power would go, we need to give it back to the interconnection grid which is there, which is like 4.2 miles from the potential site. We calculated the number of poles which we needed, considering $3,000 per pole, 20 poles for 4.2 miles, the cost would be $60,000. The battery system. Now let's introduce what if we want to store the power, whatever the modules is producing. We model this for 4 hours of storage. As you can see against the 14 hours of storage, you can see there's a peak on the middle right side, like a small peak. It's when your sun sets and the battery storage kicks in. That's where the peak lies. This was examined in the SAM model again using the lithium-ion batteries, and that has the potential of 80%. The 80% depth of discharge means the battery will be used for the 80% of the working capacity. Cost associated with the project, battery cost. With an optimistic value of $200 per kilowatt hour, the cost for the battery storage, and with the model value of 42 megawatt hours, that's again 14 hours of storage, the capacity and the total cost that with the battery came to be $8.4 million. Energy off-taking options, because at some point of time, we may not need that much amount of energy which is coming from the solar plant. But again, you cannot stop the sun from shining. So it's gonna come up, your installation is gonna be there, it's gonna produce energy which you may not need. So what you're gonna do with that? You have an off-takers, you have a potential application, you have a call center to set up, a barley modeling facility, or something as we mentioned might amuse you, a cryptocurrency mining operation. How is going to do that? We're going to see this one. It's continuing the legacy. Bisbee has been a mining city known in the whole United Nations. We are not running off the mining legacy. We are just introducing some technology into the mining. It's called cryptocurrency mining. Moving from hard rock mining to the digital mining. There is at least one company which got hold of, there's an interesting story how we got hold of this company. in the Solar Power International Conference in SDI. I was on my way to watch the hydrogen fuel powered Toyota Camry car, and I saw the stall which said mining. Now, what is a mining company doing in a renewable energy conference? I stopped by there and I saw that's U Mining, which is written on their placard or in the hoarding, it was written solar storage using that energy into mining, cryptocurrency mining. And they are already well settled in Santa Clara. This is the breakout of how much one Bitcoin or one cryptocurrency needed in a day, how much energy is needed to mine that much amount of energy. And as we said, this was an article again, I'll come back to that later, but as this was an article in the GTM, solar powered Bitcoin mining could be a very profitable business model. And this was an article back in September 2017. As I said, there's a company in Santa Clara called U Mining /U Solar, specializing in cryptocurrency mining using solar energy. They are looking for potential sites, as per the discussion with them, which went for more than 2 hours. Developers and like-minded people to host their sites and business. A win-win situation for everyone. The site will be break even in the next 7 to 10 years, possibly a worthy long-term investment. This is the company, U Solar. It's a crypto mining company based in Santa Clara, California. As I said, they primarily generate and use solar energy to produce their data centers for crypto mining. U Solar is solar plus storage plus crypto mining, means a lot of dollars. What else could be done with this project is going to a power purchase agreement. Now there are two kinds of power purchase agreement, a two-party agreement holding, considering just the host and the end user, or a three-party agreement which has a developer, PV system, host customer, and an utility. So this is a model of how a power purchase agreement could work, involving a utility, a host, and a developer. How much amount of electricity could go in, and what amount of is paid, and what is the excess which is developed, the electricity goes to whom. It's again something sitting on the table and can be discussed, involving all the people who are involved in the power purchase agreement. Project evaluation. The project has achieved its objectives: battery storage for uninterruptible operation, financing methods such as PPAs, and some solar power generation and applications which we showed. It's a Bitcoin cryptocurrency mining operation. It's a lot to ask, but something which we have very well covered in detail in the report which we're going to submit in a day or two. Additional option. This came as a flag to us when we were sitting and discussing this project. Non-residential start thing from APS, where you can have a solar installation if you are a non-residential thing, and APS will take care of the project cost and the installation, and if we can convert that into a parking structure, the APS will incur all the installation cost which goes into the project. There are a lot of asterisks, there are a lot of conditions applied thing, of course, but this could also be another point of view the city could look at. Thank you. Also I'd like to now call my industry advisor.
Well, before that, I'd like to just come back to the podium for 1 minute. Thank you. I imagine the tariff, $21 million to build a solar farm, probably give you all the papers. That's an awful lot of money. But what Dixit didn't mention is that the use of a power purchase agreement is a way to have a solar farm constructed at no out-of-pocket costs to the city. Somebody else does the financing, somebody else takes the power. You get the facility, and you can, or your land is used to build the farm, and then that power can be used by you or by another offtake of one of the possible, the cryptocurrency operation or the malting of barley. There's no malting facility anywhere in the Southwest. All the microbreweries have to reach out to the Northwest for this. That's an operation that's also consistent with Bisbee's past and Electric Dave and microbrewing and so on. But the idea is that Arizona State University is festooned with large raised bed rooftop solar structures. We have at the university about 30 megawatts of solar power now, and it can cost the university penny one. It all came out of power purchase agreements. So not everybody is eligible to use the power purchase agreement format, but municipalities are. And so it's something to consider. This doesn't have to come out of a special levy that you propose. It's something that others provide the money, and they make their money through the terms of the power purchase agreement by harvesting the investment tax credits and selling power at one price and buying it at another and so on. So it's a little too complicated to describe it in detail right here, but I'm just telling you there are ways of carrying this out that might be the way to proceed.
And that would be, if I might, the option of taking it to 4.2 miles to, rather than obviously battery storage is not an option at our purchase.
It's not a, oh no, it still could be done. It would be a microgrid that would be isolated from the grid. Or it could have a connection that's used only intermittently. But yeah, you could make a standalone system, and that might be very appealing to certain clients. Most would probably prefer having the reliability of the grid connection. APS isn't particularly interested in owning the system, but they do have that Solar Communities program, which you really should look into. It costs you nothing, and they send you a small check every month for 25 years. It's like finding money in the cushions of your pillow every day. Okay, now Keith, you're going to come up next and talk a bit more about his previous work here at Bisbee and some of the ownership models. Did you have to open the other presentation?
Yes.
It's already. Oh, you did?
Hello, Mayor. My name is Keith Rowley. I've been doing solar for many years. Dr. Rodell was my graduate advisor many, many hundreds of moons ago.
Tipping normal school.
It wasn't that far back. But since then, he's invited me back to help some of the grad students in his new program to do their programs and so forth. So I've been doing solar for more than 18 years. I've got thousands of very happy customers, and the neat thing is I've never had one customer say, "Oh, I hate solar, take it off this boat, get out of here." They all love it. Once they get it and install it and they're enjoying the sun for years and years, it's a wonderful thing. So that's neat. So now, I can push the button.
I figure out which one is
Which one is it?
Right.
There we go. Okay. So how, let's see. I can look up there, that's good. I have a company called Solar NRG. I've been doing this for many years, from sizes to little tiny cabins like in Flagstaff to huge 100 megawatt solar farms. I've designed many different systems. One of them why I'm here, one of the influences is I've helped Mike Krebs with PACE design the solar for the water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant. If anybody of you were around and Mike Krebs is working here, nice gentleman. Also, I did design one at Douglas also that's working well. So the solar portion of it is the part that I worked on, and it's working great. So I have a company that can provide all the little pieces to make this become a reality. We can do the full project management from engineering, procurement, and construction. Financing is always a big issue. So we can own the system. You can enjoy the power. And then after a certain amount of time, we'll talk about a business model. I talk about watts and electrons and sparky things. Roger, we've been working for many years together. He talks dollars and finance and tax deductions and stuff like that. He's the financial expert with all this. He's owned many banks in his lifetime, and I talk to Sparky's technical stuff. But I don't want to bore you tonight with all the detail. Dixit and Dr. Rodell and I have been working for many days on this, all the aspects of where it is, what kind of off-takers, what kind would fit this community, and that's where we came up with that selection. So we can do that, and also when it's running, you guys don't want to go get a degree in solar field design, so we can also provide operations and maintenance to take care of it. So we can do all of those things, and at some point, the ownership will talk about who would own it, and probably hand it off to Bisbee for your ownership after we take care of the initial stuff. This solar farm alone should produce a savings of about $4.8 million. That's pretty significant. Just by the electricity at 13 cents a kilowatt hour. If you're paying more for a kilowatt hour here than 13 cents, then that number's larger. So it's a significant thing that's worthwhile doing. The size of the solar farm we're talking about is the one across this parking lot. It's probably 400 times the size of that one, just to give you an idea of magnitude. Very doable. They're doing them all over the country, and it's growing. It's the fastest growing energy source in the country. I don't know if it's world too, is it? I'm not sure. But in the country, it's faster than hydro and coal and gas and nuclear all combined. Everybody loves it. It's growing fast. It's great stuff. How can I get this going? There we go. This is actually a short video from Pace that's actually our wastewater treatment plant that I helped design and lay out with Mike several years ago. The new solar farm that we're talking about here by the airport would be similar. May not have a building with some on top, but the rest of it would be very similar in design. And then every so often we'd have one of these large inverters there. And again, I don't want to get too technical, but the technology's improved, they work great, and it's a very real probability that you could have the solar farm work for 20, 30 plus years and not have very little maintenance or problems. The panels work great. And that's only about a minute, so it'll go away quick. There you go. We'll move on. Now, the city, we had an idea or impression that you liked how the wastewater treatment plant was providing a lot of money to the city of Bisbee. This solar farm is different because back then there was a production-based incentive, meaning APS was giving some money for every kilowatt hour made. That program is now gone. So the key thing here is we have to find somebody, or we, all of us together, have to find somebody to use that power and use it for a profit. So that's why we were talking, Dixit was talking previously about off-takers. Somebody to use the power and compensate us for that power. That's the key part. Ownership is important. We have several business models that work well, and one that we really like. I mean, if the city was flush with money and would buy the system outright, that is the most economic, most profitable way to do it. A lot of municipalities don't have that situation. Another model we have is, should I just keep talking to it, or do you want to speak to it? I'll keep going. We can build and own, so it's zero money out of pocket, the solar system. After 5 years, when we've taken the incentive tax credits and depreciation and whatever else that's available, at the end of 5 years, the city can have a method to buy it. So we can put it into a nonprofit, you can buy the system after that, and then again enjoy the solar for greatly reduced cost. So that's usually the best financial way to do it that people can live with. It's done all the time, people like it, it works well. The other thing I mentioned earlier is operation maintenance, care and feeding of the solar plant, to monitor it, watch it, and make sure it's working, and if something happens, come and work on it and repair it. So we can provide that service too. Okay? This is what I just mentioned, this slide. Purchase it outright, usually not practical, but the best choice. The next is we could just own it forever, and you could buy the power at a reduced amount than what the utility company is providing. The third one would be where we would own it for the first 5 years, and at the end of that, you could have bonds or whatever method enough to collect some money to pay for that at the end of 5 years at a greatly reduced cost. That's the model that we like the most. And then we've done other ones with partnerships with other groups, like the city working with us.
May I ask a question?
Mayor, please.
The $21 million that have been brought up of that cost, may I assume that that's before the incentives?
Yes.
Yes. Did you want to talk to that, the incentives? No? Okay, I'll just keep talking. That price is just an idea to give you guys an idea of where it is.
Right.
It's obviously going to take some time of talking with financial people, negotiating, adjusting things and getting to a final price. So that price is...
Understood, but that's before.
It would be before the IGCs, the incentive tax credit. Yes. And we have the capability to use that incentive tax credit, sell it off basically, and help reduce the cost of the system. So that's what you're seeing.
Yes, that's where I was going.
Yes, absolutely. Next slide. The typical development time with this kind of thing is lengthy. It takes some time. I just found out the inverters take 20 weeks just to order them, so almost 4 months, 5 months to order them. So permits, designing, permits on down, installation doesn't take that long, and then the utility wants to check it to make sure it's safe. And then at the end of that, it's working and developed and working. So that whole process could take upwards of, I think it's almost a year. Okay? And then you get to enjoy clean power. And if you do the math on the Bitcoins, they can be a profitable and usable source of money or income. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Council, questions at this point? I want to thank Dixon. I really want to thank you. Excellent job. And Professor Ron, Dr. Ron, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. And I want to thank Donna Pulling for actually making the first contact and getting us hooked up, as they say, so that we could get that done. So, do you have a question? Okay. So, if we don't have any questions, is the presentation available?
Yes, you can keep this current presentation. It's on the system.
We'll give you back your thumb drive.
But we have a written report also, and we would have submitted it, but you won't believe this, but on the drive down, we were editing this
Okay.
PowerPoint slide presentation to clarify this and rephrasing of that.
Yeah.
And so we have to do one more day of proofreading and revision on the final report.
Well, I'd like the opportunity for the citizens to be able to have a place to come to take a look at that. So I'd like, with your permission, to discuss having it placed on our website for a while, so that people can come and look at it. And also your permission for us to provide that to the press so that they can use that in their coverage of this meeting. Would that be all right?
With pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
I would like to make one comment.
Yes, sir.
At the podium. Always standing at a podium at ASU, might as well stand. We started this in February, and it's here as October. One of the slides showed that there were 3 students initially involved in this. One of them decided he wanted to try something different and had an option to do a solar project in Kenya. And so he said, Bisbee's nice, but I want to check out Kenya. So he peeled off. And the other student, Dixon chose to stay a little bit longer to put a little more analysis into this. The second student said, I want to graduate at this point. So we let him leave early. So it all of it ultimately fell on Dixon's shoulders. So the phrase was, Dixon will fix it.
Wow, he's done a great job.
Well, so if you had just gone to Keith's company, Keith and Rogers' company back in February, you'd have had that report in your hand a month, but you'd have been short a few $1,000s. Maybe many thousands, I don't know. But so what you get for with working with the university is a free study, which we think is reasonably competent, but it just takes longer to carry out the university way university.
You know, a government group, you sort of understand.
You sort of understand.
Things like that.
So we appreciate your patience. We hope to have this completed by the beginning of the summer. It just took a little longer because of the personal problems.
I totally understand. I remember, I think we all had breakfast in the morning.
That's right.
Right. So anyway, thank you all very, very much once again.
You're most welcome.
And we have anybody in the audience with questions, can they corner you afterwards?
Sure. Anytime they like.
Thank you.
If you don't mind.
Actually, we're not in a position of taking the questions.
Well, I can talk with you offline, as they say.
Right.
Thanks again for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very, very much. Do we have a motion? Mr. Higgins? Do we have a... Oh, thank you. We have a motion, we have a second. Those in favor of adjournment, signify by stating aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We stand adjourned for a half hour. Wow. 31 minutes.
Well, usually it's 5 minutes, right? Oh, sorry. I missed.
How's the line back?
Yeah.